Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rogue Reads. We were just chit-chatting a moment ago, so it's going to take me a little while to slip into formal mode. But welcome to Rogue Reads, which is a production of the Rogue Women Writers monthly with 4 incredible authors. I think the lineups get more incredible each show, and I'm not just flattering this group of 4 to say that. The show I've been excited about for months and months. So a huge welcome to our lineup, which includes GREGG HURWITZ, STUART GIBBS, Mark Greaney, and Mia MANASALA. Did I get that right, Mia? Are you
MANASALA.
MANASALA. MANASALA. I have a name that is very hard to pronounce, and I always feel like I want to get it right for everybody else. I would only have gotten Mark's right because he prompted me at the start of the show. So it is great to welcome you all. We will be talking to these 4 authors about their new releases tonight. We will be sharing their favorite drinks, and we will be including from some authors who may choose to read a short excerpt, or we might just be going deeper into the behind the scenes of their books and asking more questions. We have a giveaway tonight, which every registered entrant will be entered to win. It's a copy of GREGG HURWITZ's new Dark Horse, an Orphan X novel. And all you have to do is be registered for us to choose a winner later this month or early next month. And I want to say a really big welcome to our Zoom room audience. It's always so great to have people there. Enter your questions in the chat. If at all possible, I'm going to leave time so that we can have that back and forth give and take with the authors. So with no further ado, I will introduce GREGG HURWITZ. Gregg's character loves to drink vodka, and because it would be likely that I could fill this with water, I need to show you the bottle. Hold on a second, guys. No, it's not X's brand of vodka, but I am going to take an honorary sip. This is for you, X. Ugh, I don't know how he does it. Okay, GREGG HURWITZ is the New York Times and #1 internationally best-selling author of 23 thrillers, both standalones and the Orphan X series. He has won numerous awards and been published in 33 languages. GREGG currently serves as co-president of International Thriller Writers. Additionally, he's written screenplays and television scripts for many of the major studios and networks, comics for AWA, DC, and Marvel, and political and cultural pieces for the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and more. GREGG lives with his Rhodesian Ridgebacks in LA, where he continues to play soccer, frequently injuring himself. We are going to hear just a little bit about Dark Horse, the 7th Orphan X novel, before we turn to GREGG and ask him some questions. So, X faces his most challenging mission ever in Dark Horse. Evan Smoke was a government assassin for the off-the-books orphan program. After he broke with the program, he adopted a new name and a new mission, the Nowhere Man, helping the most desperate in their times of trouble. Having just survived an attack on his life and the complete devastation of his base of operations, Evan isn't interested in taking on a new mission, but one finds him. There's a kingpin of a major drug dealing operation in South Texas, who's also the patron of the local area supplying employment and legitimate operations, providing help to the helpless and rough justice to the downtrodden, a future to people with little hope. He's a complex character, not anybody you could see as all bad or all good. And he's helpless when one of the most vicious cartels kidnaps his innocent 18-year-old daughter. So GREGG, let's talk about the new novel. Tell us what I missed. Tell us your take on it. Share Dark Horse with our audience.
Well, you handled the introduction beautifully, so I don't have a whole bunch to add. I will say that Evan, once he left the program where he was an assassin committing acts that are illegal under international law, he went off the radar. And so he kept his phone number, 1-855 to nowhere. That's an encrypted line, which you can call and somebody will answer. And that's where people call who have nowhere else to turn. Just people who are desperate. Nobody can help them. And he's one of the world's top trained assassins, and he'll kind of swing to their rescue. And I always thought that one day when I started this series, that phone would ring and it would be somebody with a very ambiguous and complicated and textured persona. Basically what would happen if somebody called and it was a fairly bad man, but the mission itself was good. And that's what we have in Argon Urea. He's sort of cartel 2.0 to the real cartel. He's Netflix to Blockbuster. He skirts the edges of international law. He wires a lot of money around. He's, some of it is illegal. Some of it is to the detriment of people, but he takes a lot of his money and puts it back into the community around him. And so he makes an argument later on in the book where he basically talks about American big pharma and argues he's as much of a free market capitalist as our big pharma companies. The only difference is the communities around him get something back. Well, now his daughter's been taken. She's 18. She's pure. She's as good as he is not. And so should Evan help somebody who's an ambiguously bad man if the mission itself is just? And so the question that I really have Evan ask himself here is, can a bad man be saved? And that's a question Evan has been asking of himself since he left the program. And so really I wanted a character that could hold up a dark mirror to Evan 6 books in to further complicate his mission in the story.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because that's what I felt like. It was complexifying the journey Evan was already on himself in a way.
Thank you.
So fantastic. So we're going to go down our line of authors, let everybody sort of do that, introduce their book so you can get excited about it. And I will say that for those who do not win our book prize tonight, please go on bookshop.org to your local bookstore or even the Big A, which in the next Orphan X novel, I think that Evan's going to be taking down the Big A, Amazon. That's just a little joke, guys. It's so much harder to joke by Zoom. You would have known I was. Okay, anyway, we're going to be going down the line.
Jenny.
What?
It's just the Zoom delay for the joke. It's like the timing's hard to catch, but I'm with you. I'm just with you on a half of a second delay. So.
Okay. Well, anyway, it was too political anyway. People love him. I love him. Fine. Okay. We're going to go down the line. We're going to let each of these authors talk about their books in a little intro like that so you all get a feeling for them. And you can order them from any of those places and read them. And then we're going to circle back around and ask more questions and go into more depth. So Mia P. MANASALA is a writer and a book coach from Chicago who loves books, baking, and badass women. She uses humor and murder to explore aspects of the Filipino diaspora, queerness, and her millennial love for pop culture. She is the winner of multiple awards. I'm just going to say as many of them as I get right. The 2018 Hugh Holton Award, the 2018 Eleanor Taylor Bland Crime Fiction Writers of Color Award, the 2017 William F. D. Camellis Domestic Grant, which is so neat. We have to get into this, Mia, for unpublished writers, and the 2016 Mystery Writers of America Helen McCloy Scholarship. She's also a 2017 Pitch Wars alum and 2018 through 2020 mentor for Pitch Wars. A lover of all things geeky, Mia spends her days procrastinating, love it, playing dating sims, reading cozy mysteries, cuddling her dogs. And we are going to be talking, her debut novel, which is the first in the series, Arsenic and Adobo, is the first in the series. And we're going to be talking tonight about homicide and Halo Halo. So this is the log line that I love. Thank you. It's such a cool cover too. Death at a beauty pageant turns Tita Rosie's kitchen upside down in the latest entry of this witty and humorous series. Things are heating up for Lila, not in her love life, which she insists on keeping non-existent, despite the attention of 2 very eligible bachelors, or her professional life, since she can't bring herself to open her new cafe after the unpleasantness that occurred a few months ago. No, things are heating up quite literally since summer. Her least favorite season has just started. To add to her feelings of sticky unease, Lila's little town of Shady Palms has resurrected the Miss Teen Shady Palms beauty pageant. I love how Shady is in there with beauty pageant, which she won many years ago, a fact that serves as a wedge between Lila and her cousin/rival. But when the head judge of the pageant is murdered and Bernadette becomes the main suspect, the two must put aside their differences and solve the case, because it looks like one of them might be next. Mia, please tell us about the second in the series.
Sure. So book 2 is Homicide and Halo Halo, and it takes place a few months after the events of book 1. So it's a cozy mystery series. So technically each book can be read as a standalone. The the crime is, complete in here, but you get a deeper sense of my protagonist Lila and her character development and journey if you start from the beginning. So again, this book takes place after solving the murder that she was accused of in book 1. So unlike some other cozy mysteries, I kind of have her dealing with the aftermath of that. So even though this is a cozy mystery series, and I say this in the author's note, it does touch on some heavier topics such as, PTSD and mental health and as well as like other things like predatory behavior, because we're talking about kind of a skeevy judge who was murdered at a beauty pageant and things like that. And it also touches on, unresolved grief. The reason my protagonist is a beauty queen is because her mother, her deceased mother, was a former beauty queen in the Philippines who kind of pushed her into this. So the revival of this pageant is bringing up so many uncomfortable feelings for her, on top of the issues she's already dealing with.
Yeah, I love that idea that, and I think you can run a risk in a cozy mystery that so many bad things kind of keep happening and they're not necessarily integrated into the next story. And you allowed that to be a shadow that kind of continued through the whole story. So I forgot to share, because I shared it earlier before we started, the drink that Mia gave on offering. I'm going to hold it up because I think everybody needs to make one of these. It's a slushy sangria. Mine has fruit, some red wine, but a lot of like juice. I mean, you can go heavy or not on this. And I mean, it's like the opposite of what X would drink, right?
Yeah, in the book, I joke it's like a health tonic because I'm like, frozen berries, red wine has antioxidants. Like, yeah,
absolutely. And it tastes like summer in a glass. Okay, we are going to keep going down the line. Thank you very much for that introduction, Mia. I think I did the next in alphabet. It was all like in a weird order in my head. But yeah, I think we're going next to Stuart Gibbs. Welcome, Stuart. Let me just find you on the screen if I can. Maybe I can't. Stuart Gibbs is a New York Times bestselling author of the Charlie Thorne series, the Fun Jungle series, the Moonbase Alpha series, and Spy School series. And we're here to talk tonight about a very fun new iteration of Spy School. He has written screenplays, worked on a whole bunch of animated films, developed TV shows, been a newspaper columnist, and researched capybaras, the world's largest rodents, which, Stuart, are you there? Really, like the whole week I was preparing, I'm like, rodents of impossible size, right?
They are the original rodents of unusual size. Yes. They're not quite as big as the ones in The Princess Bride, but they're about the size of an ottoman, really. So, yeah.
Where do they live?
They live in the rainforests of South America. They actually, since I researched them, they've become very, very. But they're all over the internet now. They're really adorable as far as rodents go, and so there's
Yeah. We were in New York City the other day for the first time in a long, long time. I live north of the city. And I was, anybody who knows New York City, it's on a park, like in the middle of a block, waiting for the light to turn. And on the next block after the intersection with the light, I see a rat run across the street, which means that was a really big rat.
Yeah. Okay. They don't look like big rats. I should say they look like somebody took an Airedale and kind of smushed it a little bit, and so they're cute. They're adorable.
Okay, we're going to get into why you researched them later. But let me read about Spy School. So Spy School started out as a series for young readers, and the iteration that we're here to talk about tonight is a graphic novel, which I think is fantastic. And I know we have some graphic novel fans in the audience. So let's do this. Can an undercover nerd become a superstar secret agent? Ben Ripley may only be in middle school, but he's already pegged his dream job, CIA or bust. Unfortunately for him, his personality doesn't exactly scream secret agent. In fact, Ben is so awkward, he can barely get to school and back without a mishap. Because of his innate nerdiness, Ben is not surprised when he was recruited for a magnet school with a focus on science. But he's entirely shocked to discover that the school is actually a front for a junior CIA academy. Could the CIA really want him? Actually, no. There's been a case of mistaken identity. But that doesn't stop Ben from trying to morph into a super cool undercover agent, kind that always gets the girl. And through a series of hilarious misadventures, Ben realizes he might actually be a halfway decent spy if he can survive all the attempts being made on his life. Tell us about Spy School. Don't get so much into how it came, the transformation came about, because we're going to talk about it. But just tell us about Ben for those who don't know him.
Well, Ben is, he's supposed to be kind of the everyman, really, in all of this. This is like the oldest idea I've ever had for anything I've written. It's like an idea I had when I was a kid, because I saw my first James Bond movie, and even though I thought James Bond was like the coolest guy ever, and I thought, oh, it'd be great to learn how to be a spy and go to spy school, I realized that if you took really even the most competent, intelligent person you knew and dropped them into the middle of a James Bond movie, that would instantly stop being an action movie and start being a comedy. And so Ben is supposed to really be kind of just about every one of us who gets sort of thrust into the James Bond world and finds out that nothing in there works the way it's supposed to. It certainly doesn't work the way it does in the movies, and he kind of bumbles his way through a lot, but he's actually very smart, and he's very good at making friends and winning people over. And so between those two things, he manages through friends and brains, he manages to sort of persevere and save the day.
Everything you said is not true, Stuart, and life works exactly like a James Bond movie. I know it does. Yeah, I love that. I love the idea that this kid who is every kid, and we can all relate to, who doesn't relate to that feeling of being outclassed but wanting to rise. That's wonderful. Here, Ben's drink is much more my style. I'm usually not a big drinker. Yeah, cherry cola. Yeah, black cherry cola.
Yeah. I should point out, like, he is too young for any of the previous drinks on this.
Yeah, I know. But it's nice that he's here tonight, seeing how it works when he gets to James Bond world. All right, thank you very much, Stuart. So let's go to Mark Greaney. #1 New York Times bestselling author Mark Greaney's debut thriller, The Gray Man, became a national bestseller, and it was followed by 10 Gray Man novels, including his latest, CR6. Mark is also the author or co-author of 7 Tom Clancy novels, collaborating with Tom on 3 of them before Tom's death in 2013. Red Medal, a military thriller written by Mark Greaney and Lieutenant Colonel Hunter R. Rawlings, U.S. Marine Corps, became a New York Times bestseller. And a future film adaptation of The Gray Man is in production at Netflix with Ryan Gosling and also, I think, Chris Evans. Am I right? Yeah. And with a second film adaptation to produce in production. Mark's scripted audio play, Armored, is in development. And in his research, Mark has traveled to dozens of countries, visited the Pentagon, military bases, Washington, D.C. intelligence agencies, and trained alongside military law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, and close-range combat techniques. See, everything in life works like a James Bond novel. He lives in Memphis, Tennessee with his wife, his 3 children, stepchildren, and 3 dogs. So, CR6. Before he was the Gray Man, Court Gentry was CR6, the junior member of the CIA action team. And in their first mission, they took out a terrorist leader at a terrible price. Years have passed. Gray Man is on a simple mission when he sees a ghost, the long dead terrorist. Remarkably energetic for a dead man. A decade of time hasn't changed the Gray Man. He isn't one to leave a job unfinished or a blood debt unpaid. So tell us, Mark, while I find your drink, tell us about CR6.
Yeah, you did that was a good description there. It's the first book. So as you said, it's 11 books into the series now for me. So I wanted to go back and do not exactly an origin story because he's already working in the agency, but this book is told in 2 timelines that intersect and go throughout the entire book. In one of the timelines, he's a young CIA paramilitary officer, 25 years old, and in the other timeline, which is in the present, 12 years later, he's older, wiser, more world weary, and he's working as kind of a freelance intelligence asset. And he's on this mission in the present where he sees somebody from this horrible mission that was his first mission as a paramilitary. So it has him racing. Really, he's racing against 2 clocks, and 12 years ago and then in the present. And he's trying to unravel a mystery in the present about what the guy who survived 12 years ago is up to. So it's a really personal story for the hero. It has a ton of twists and turns, and it's kind of, as I said, it's not an origin story because this doesn't show him originating, but it shows him at a very young age, much younger age. So it's kind of fun to dial back on his personality a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing to do with a series because it allows you to change it up. And I would think, and this is one of the things I'd like to maybe turn to Greg for with our next question, but it allows you, I would think, to, the challenge of the series, keeping it fresh. How do you do something different? And here you're doing interlocking time frames and also just giving your character such a back, he had that story already, but you're bringing it to the reader in a whole new way. So yeah. It's a great conceit. Okay, I definitely want to talk with the authors a little bit to the extent that they're series authors about the challenge of writing this series. So I don't know, Greg, maybe, let's talk a little bit about X as a character. And one of the things I was wondering, and I feel like we've talked about this a little, but definitely for our audience, like how intentional you were when you sat down and decided to create this series character with a very complex backstory and sort of a mission that would, guide him morally, but also tangibly. Tell us about the creation.
The original creation, you mean way back when?
Kind of, and then take us through the Dark Horse.
Here's what's interesting. I mean, there's so many great series out there that we grew up with, right? From Bond to Bourne to Reacher, it's kind of endless. And so what was funny is I wrote a lot of Hitchcock standalone everyman thrillers. And I had this idea for Orphan X, and I was a little bit afraid of it because I was like, if I embark on this with a series, I want to really make sure that I have enough of a handle on what things will make it feel unique and make it feel distinctive. And all of that to me accrues to character. Like plot for me is just character in motion. And that's one of the things I always think about when I'm writing is, if your protagonist answers a question or handles an action scene much as a normal person would do who's an operative, then you haven't cracked, right, the notion of what the character is. And there's so many places that do it well. We think about James Bond, like a lot of people won't necessarily tell you their favorite action sequence, but we all know how he likes to take his martini, So part of it with X was I was thinking a lot about, having a kid pulled out of a foster home at the age of 12, trained to be an assassin. That's a trope, right? It's not like that's a wholly unique notion. And so the first sort of card that turned over for me was when I thought, well, what if that also was the best thing that ever happened to him? Like, what if his handler and father figure loved him and was the first person to treat him like a human and basically trained him, brought him into the world and turned him into, as I like to call him, like a blue collar Renaissance man. And that's a lot of what happened. And so this experience is very hybrid for Evan in that he did all these terrible things, but it's also the only version of himself that he ever could have been, the only human version of himself. So that was number one. And number two was when I realized that he would live and exist among ordinary people instead of like being a total loner, the way that Lee Child has done so masterfully with Reacher. I wanted Orphan X to toggle back and forth between these incredibly high stake archetypal suspense and action and thriller scenes. And then coming home to this, his cover identity where he gets in an argument with the elderly, irritable Jewish lady who lives downstairs from him, who's like angry that his truck leaked oil when it was really shot up with bullets and rounds. And so that toggling between the sort of archetypal and quotidian concerns of everyday people matched the part of him and his character where he, one of the things I say early on is that Evan never learned how to speak the strange language of intimacy. And so the series is really about him cracking open from these the 10 Assassin's Commandments he's lived his whole life from, and introducing all the messiness and complication of human interaction. And that's why he lives among people, and it's infuriating and angering. But each book opens up that door a little bit wider. And this one is no exception, because in Aragon Urea, he faces somebody who is sufficiently complex and, has a lot of flaws, but also has a lot of strengths that Evan doesn't. And so he's a real match for Evan in a lot of ways, morally, and in terms of forcefulness and power. And so each of the books really is around and moves around that. And that was sort of the birth of the series, was figuring out these pieces where it could be really distinctive, which is, it's what we all want, is to have, that's one of the things that I think all of us on this panel spend a lot of time thinking about what differentiates our character. And that's relative to how much readers are going to enjoy and engage with them.
Yeah, and relate to them because you found the universal even in the very unusual character. Hold on, for the emerging writers in the audience, we always have a lot of them. Let me just quote GREGG HURWITZ. Plot is character in motion. Is that how you said it? Mm-hmm. Brilliant, brilliant. Plot is character in motion. Because we all talk about it, right? Where do you start with plot or character? I love that. And yeah, and I love the idea that it's true. I can picture X like in an elevator just having a conversation, and yet he's a guy who has these skills that, you know, almost nobody can relate to. So in conceptualizing the series and then Dark Horse in particular, it was those contrasts, right? And it was, how could you bring those contrasts to the fore to make really gripping thriller fiction? Fascinating. Okay, we're going to keep going down the line because I know and Chris, you alert me like with a wave or something if there's a question that we should turn to now that's particularly apropos, or else we'll take questions at the end. But Mia, this is my first question for you. Clever alliterative titles, food, humor, and family, enough aptly constructed red herrings to fill a fish farm. I started feeling I was getting a little clever myself. That's how you write a cozy mystery series. And then in the dedication, I was like, you know, touched to see that it was your mom who introduced you to cozies, right? Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about your connection? You can talk about Hollow Hollow in particular, but also your connection to this medium, this genre, this subgenre.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I'm sure like many of the people here, you know, I've been a lifelong mystery fan. So like my character, Lila, I grew up in a multi-generational immigrant household, right? I was born and raised in Chicago, but my parents and grandparents immigrated much earlier. And so, you know, I grew up watching Murder, She Wrote, Matlock, and Perry Mason with my grandparents. My mom would share her Nancy Drews with me when I was younger. And as I got older, she, you know, we would, you know, mine was not the household where like, oh, you're too young for that. Like if it was in the house, it was fair game, you know? So like my dad's Robert Ludlum's, my mom's Mary Higgins Clark's, you know, growing up as a kid. And then my mom and I are both library workers. So she's a page at her library and I work in youth services. My patrons actually really love Stuart's books. So when I saw him, I was like, oh, ooh, nice. But anyway, so like my mom's a page, which means she's the person who shelves the books. And so one day she was shelving books, you know, in the fiction section, and she was like, huh, Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder, you know, like the Joanne Fluke series. And, you know, like one of the few things we love more than books is food in my family. So the fact that she found this subgenre that seemed to embrace two of our biggest loves, we were like, oh, this is so cool. It's like, it was like tailor made for us. And this was, you know, I had come back to maybe like 2014, 2015, you know, so is when I got, you know, the deep dive into cozy mysteries. But at that time, you know, the more I read, the more I was like, I'm not really seeing myself in the pages, you know, I'm not really seeing my experiences, and I would love to be able to someday put my own spin on it. So this book, I wrote, you know, quite literally for me and my mom, the Arsenic and Adobo, I should say. I started that series not thinking that anyone would particularly care for it, but knowing it was something that my mom and I wanted to see. Mm-hmm. And we got very lucky that I was wrong. And there are people out there who enjoy what, you know, the books that I'm putting out.
So I'll just double up the questions a little bit for you just because of what you're touching on. So the first one, and we're here to talk about Homicide and Hollow Hollow, and I want to get back into it, but you came to it through the Malice Domestic. So tell us a little bit about, I guess, Mia is also the closest to a debut in our lineup tonight. So just tell us a little bit about your publishing journey right now, and then we'll move on down the line.
Well, that's just a little bit interesting because so Arsenic and Adobo was not the book that won the Malice Domestic grant. I had another book before that. Again, another Filipino American millennial. Oh, sorry, my thing went off. It was called Death Comes to Comic-Con and was a young Filipino American solving a murder mystery at a comic book convention. And so it won the Malice Domestic grant. It got me into Pitch, which is a mentorship program. It got me my first agent, but then it didn't sell. And it got me to acquisitions 3 times. So, you know, I got so many yeses until sales kind of smacked me down. And their most common feedback was that I had no audience. And so while I was getting rejected for 1.5 years on that book, which is when I started writing this one. And again, this is why, I was like, I don't care if people don't want to read it. I'm going to write what I want to read. I'm going to write something to make my mom happy. So like that first book was like my initial exploration, like that learning how to write a book. This was like, this is for me. If I can't sell it, whatever, but I'm going to keep on pushing on. So a year and a half of rejection, wrote this book. My first agent didn't like it. We split up. I had to find a new agent.
Wow.
And she sold the book in 2 weeks at auction. So it was a bit of a roller coaster to get here.
Isn't that amazing? Like the presumptuous of there's not an audience, as if like anybody would know the vast variety of audience members. That's an incredible story. Thank you. Yes, Tosca, one of our roads, reminds me. So I am going to skip to Mark Greaney because I forgot Mark's drink. I think it's because Mark, I've taken a sip of all the drinks, and I don't know that I can take Mark's drink. Hold on a second. It's really strong. I've already told you that black cherry cola is my cup of tea. I'm gonna try it. Okay, it's whiskey. It's going down. Hold on. Oh my God! Seriously, you know how I like this whiskey? How I like bourbon? I like it in bourbon balls, which we have at Christmas time. The chocolate, the sugar, and the nuts. But I admire you, Mark, and we already know that Mark, kills people with his bare hands, so he can handle that drink. Okay, Mark. Let's go. Okay, so my first question about TR6, you actually already talked about, but I want to go deeper into it. I said, go back 12 years in time with CR6 and create a highly effective deepening of the backstory for court gentry. And it must have been a very complex novel to write because you're dealing with two very twisted stories and timelines. Tell us about the construction and the writing process.
Yeah, it was tough, but like a lot of things in my writing career, I didn't know. I just walked into the minefield unaware that there were mines in there. And I was a couple months into writing this book when I was just so like overwhelmed by all it's weird when you have to go research your own books. And I have 11 in the series, so I'd have to go back and say, okay, what did I say about where he was at this time or whatever? And also there was an aspect of it that I really kind of enjoyed is after 11 books, there's recurring characters, and then there's like formerly recurring characters who either died or fallen by the wayside in other ways. And going back 12 years, I get to kind of bring those people back to life for that storyline. And there's one character who, when I wrote my first book, I didn't have it planned as a series. I was just trying to get published and just a little paperback book published. So I wasn't thinking ahead. And there was a character in The Gray Man, the first book, who's played by Billy Bob Thornton in the movie. And he's basically in the book, he's only in basically for one scene, but he's a really formative person in court's history. So I've missed him ever since I killed him off. And every other book, I would love to have this guy come back. So finally I got to do that. And also, as I said before, kind of changing people's personality and maturity levels and focus over 12 years was kind of a fun aspect. There's another character named Zach, who's in the current timelines or in the current books. He's a little bit of a wisecracking. He's a little bit of comic relief, but 12 years ago, he was the head of a CIA paramilitary operations team. It's the middle of the war on terror. He'd had losses on his unit, and it just didn't make sense to make him like the wisecracking comic relief that he is in the later books. So you kind of get a different version of him. Some of it, I make sure that some of it shines through, so it's not a completely different personality. But all that was really, really fun to work on. And I only say that because the book is done and finished. At the time, it feels like a nightmare, but I'm glad that it came out the way it did.
No, it does sound fun. Just nuts and bolts for us. Like, did you write both stories kind of in linear succession? Did you do them separately? Like, how did you integrate the two timelines?
My initial thought was that I would write one timeline and then write another and kind of weave it together, and it didn't work at all. It was really important for me that when we come back in the present, it wasn't this jarring thing to where people might be more invested in the action in the past. And we've as readers, we've all opened up a book and gone to a new chapter, and it's like, oh, it's this other plot line that I'm not that interested in. So I really had to build the story together, even though there's the 25-year-old Gentry and the 37-year-old Gentry. I had to kind of weave a past chapter and a present chapter together in other ways. So I ended up writing it all back and forth instead of one at a time. And I think that works better, at least for me.
That's fascinating. Okay, we have some great questions about series and about film, both of which are on my question list. We're going to get to them, but I want to talk to Stuart a little bit because I hinted at this in the introduction, and I'm just personally fascinated. And I guess it touches on Mark's experience a little bit too, and just, early incarnations and later. So now we've got Ben, and he's in a graphic novel. Tell us how the whole project came to be. And if you like, tell us a little bit about the original Spy School series, which, am I right? Was it published back in 2013? Yeah.
Yeah, we're coming up on the 10th year anniversary of the first publication of Spy School. I did start in screenwriting. This was an idea I tried to sell as a movie multiple times, so Spy School is the 10th book will come out this year. So it gets into that whole thing with creating a character that I didn't know there would be a book 2. So the fact that I'm now on book 10 is just fantastic. I kept this going as a series because I just didn't want to say goodbye to all the characters I was creating and kept thinking of ideas for where they could go. The graphic novel came about because I write for middle grade, and the graphic novel has just become this enormous thing for young readers. And my publisher was excited to they were casting around like, well, whose books could they turn into a graphic novel? And I was like, me. Okay, so I actually didn't know how you wrote a graphic novel, but I didn't know how you wrote a screenplay. And since they were both very visual, I just wrote the screenplay version of my book for the graphic novel, and then handed that off to my incredibly talented illustrator, Anjan Sarkar, who I've never met, actually. But we've been in touch, but and he just he did an amazing job. He did, I created this whole story, but he blocked out every page and every panel and all that. And I've since actually gone to work on a different graphic novel and found out that a lot of the time when you do a graphic novel, you actually are supposed to lay out every single panel, every piece of dialogue in the panel, all that stuff. Anjan took all that on and did all the paneling himself, and did such an amazing job. So it's really a delight to kind of get to see your book get turned into another version, a visual version. It'd be great if Hollywood would actually step up and make the movie version of this, which they have not. But now I'm like, well, at least I've got like the flip movie version of it or whatever.
No, it is. It's almost like an animated, right? It's the animated version of it. How did you? I had that question about Anjan and how you guys were put together. Was the publisher involved in that? How did it work?
That was the publisher. Yeah. I'm just so lucky just to start out because I have like the best cover designer, art director in the world, who's Lucy Cummins, who has come up with this sort of incredibly iconic person we all call Spy Guy. But then Lucy is actually, although she does the art for my cover, she's really an art director. And so she found Anjan and I think there were some other choices, but the decision was pretty much made by the time I was shown his stuff. And what was actually kind of fascinating was that when he would turn in his pages, they would ask me for notes and they would ask Lucy for notes. But because she's so visual, she was giving entirely different notes than I was. My notes were much more story based, and her notes were like, well, maybe there should be 2 people in this panel, or maybe they should have. And like that was not part of my process at all. So it was really fun for me to see how she like handled everything visually.
Yeah, the visual transition, that's amazing. All right, so some of the questions are specific to the authors, which hopefully we'll get to at the end, but 2 general questions will go right down the line, starting with Greg. The first about series, and Greg, I've read and loved your standalones as well as X. Talk a little bit about, you touched on it, but about being at book 7 in a series, a long-running series, I think we can say a successful series at this point, and maybe contrast it with your standalones and, clue the audience into Dark Horse and some of your other work as well.
Well, one of the things that's really fun when you write a standalone is you can pick your hero up anywhere you want, or your protagonist, and leave them off wherever you want. And, with the series, it takes a little bit more planning. I mean, one of the things I was struck by when I was writing the first Orphan X is I overwrote it. I wrote a lot of the scenes of Evan in the foster home. I wrote his first mission as Orphan X, which his first official mission at the age of 19, which became the opening scene, altered very slightly for the 4th book. And the foster home scenes were in the 6th book. I mean, but I needed to know more about laying the foundation for this whole character than needed to be in the first book. And so in a certain way, I kind of overwrote and overstuffed it, but then I had it all in my head and I pulled out a lot of these pieces. And it was really interesting because I could write forward then in the series, and really feel like I knew where I was heading for certain essential aspects of Evan's life instead of kind of making them up on a fly. Like often it feels like in a TV room where you're like, oh man, like we have this weight of mythology behind us and how do we make it make sense in retrospect? And this was pretty well thought out, in a way that was really helpful to me. And of course, other things aren't. You discover as you go. And like Mark was mentioning, it can be a pain when you have a bunch of books to go back and have to search through all of them. Did I use this phrase? Where was Evan in this scene with this thing, right? What hand was what side of the body was this person injured? You're like these details that stretch back over books, but it's important to get that right, because so much of what we do is to try to carry the reader across this, across the suspension of disbelief. And so any little mishap can screw that up. But then I'd say the positive aspects of it. So there's a lot more challenges, but the thing that's great is that they do feel like the characters in the world is something that you can kind of come home to. It's such a running start. Like once you really can understand the characters to write them from the inside out with their sensibilities and where they're headed. And so there's a real familiarity with that I've really enjoyed, especially staying with Evan as long as I have. He's become kind of a proxy and a mirror for some of the things I'm learning and figuring out in a lot of ways in my own life. If I have certain challenges, they're reflected in the books. And, Joan Didion has one of my favorite quotations about writing. She said, "I write so I know what I think." And I think about that all the time. I've written so many books where I don't even understand why I'm pulling at certain themes. And I'll look back at them later and it's like crystal clear that there's some sort of, refracted ray from something that I'm contending with. And so there's a lot of comfort to do that with a character who you return to again and again. And, the interaction and engagement with readers is fantastic. It's the best part of it. It's really rewarding when people are waiting and anticipating the next chapter in something. And you don't always have that in a standalone, but there's sort of the thrill of a new introduction of a whole new world. So they're varied.
That's true. It's a little like the Charles Dickens experience. Your readers are like on the dock waiting for the next installment. And I saw that a lot of the critics noted the very personal dimension in Dark Horse. So it sounds like it's a series. Future fans out there, it's a series that's getting deeper with each installation. I can accurately say. I'm going to pause. We're going to go on to Mia with her burgeoning series, book 2 just out, but I'm totally interrupting because I think we all agree that nurturing the younger generation of readers is core to what we do. And apparently there's a 10-year-old in the audience who has a question for Stuart. I'd love to hear what it is. Chris, are you able to read it or should I go looking for it? Or
yeah, no, I can read it.
Okay, Stuart, this is for you.
It's from Amanda De Erico. My 10-year-old son is here and he is a huge fan of Spy School and an aspiring writer. And his question is, how do you connect all the clues and solution to the mystery together in the end?
Yeah.
First of all, hi to your son. Thank him for tuning in for all of this. I mean, given they all do mysteries, I'm always interested to know how other people do it. But I have a good friend, James Ponte, who also writes middle grade mysteries, who says that when you're writing a mystery, you're basically thinking like a criminal, and you come up with a crime first, and then you figure out how you would pull that crime off, and then sometimes that leads you to asking a lot of questions at places that then you get worried that they're gonna like throw you in jail because you're saying like, you know, like, how is this painting bolted to the wall? Or, you know, I like a question I've actually had to ask is, does a koala fit in a backpack? Which they do, but you sort of you sort of say like, okay, I know how how the bad guy does it, and then you almost sort of walk backwards and say, okay, well, what kind of clues would have to be left behind to figure that out? What kind of clues can my hero uncover? And then one of the big tricks is trying to hide those clues in a bunch of red herrings so that the real clues don't necessarily stand out as much as the fake clues do. So it's a lot of brainstorming and outlining and working the story out well before you ever sit down and write the first chapter.
Great answer. And to the aspiring younger writer, I'm going to say that we were talking in the beginning about some of the great mystery conferences that now offer virtual or online segments. I wish somebody had told me this when I was a young, aspiring writer. You might want to check them out, and you could sit in on a panel, sometimes taught by one of the greats like Stuart, and get some advice that way too. So if there are any questions along that line, Mom of the future writer, feel free to email me through the roads. I'll be happy to tell you. Okay, so let's go back to Mia with the same question about the series. So Homicide and Hollow Hollow, we talked a little bit about it was important for you to integrate some of the events in Adobo, but tell us a little bit about being at this point in the series and maybe even your thoughts for down the line.
Yeah, so when I thought of this character, I needed someone who was young enough that it makes sense that every single book there had to be some sort of like character journey for something for her to learn. I don't know, so something about so I respect the cozy genre, but I also like to think of different ways where I can kind of push at the boundaries to make it my own. It's actually really fun having certain constraints because it makes me be creative about certain things. So again, the point of cozy mysteries is, one, that they're light and they have their happy ending, but that again, you can pick it up at any time and you should be able to understand it. Right? If you pick up book 35, in a cozy series, you should be like, okay, I know who this character is. I understand the setting. Yes, it's totally believable that they've stumbled upon their 35th body, even though they're a cookie baker. Cool. Got it. But like how to conceivably keep that up every single time, but without leaving that character stagnant. Right. So I was like, okay, 25, thinking about like, that's someone who thinks they know everything, but they really know nothing. And that's how I wanted her to start at the beginning, right? So she, and again, I'm leaning heavily both into cozy tropes and rom-com tropes with this that I wanted to play with. So this is someone with like big fish in a small pond syndrome. She thinks she was better than the town she grew up in. She went away to Chicago for college and life smacked her down. So she has to return home, lick her wounds, and kind of reassess who she thinks she is and who she's supposed to be and what she's supposed to have. And so, that's not something you solve in one book, right? And like you have multiple, and progression is not always moving forward, right? You maybe, learn one thing, but you regress in another. And so I try to keep that in mind where like, okay, where's it believable? Like, oh, she's moved forward with here and she, in this area of her life and she's doing better. Ooh, but she has not dealt with that, and that's going to come to bite her. So trying to figure out and mind the different aspects of her character and what it would believably be. And, and sometimes it's outside forces, right? Sometimes it's not that she needs to change. It's that's why I like Amateur Sleuth. This is just a regular human being trying to make the best of her life, and she keeps getting thrown into these extraordinary circumstances. So how can I use that outside pressure to further, who she is and what her story is? And I kind of, think like incrementally. So it was like a 3-book deal was my initial contract. So I was like, okay, I'm guaranteed this. So I know that by book 3, I at least want to reach this area. If they continue the series, which they have, thank goodness, great. Because there's this area that I can push in. But like I do try to complete, like, I guess you can think of as mini arcs, because the saddest thing is like when a series gets canceled midway and you're like, oh, but I thought we were going to learn about the. So I try to give like little mini completions, but still like, oh man, I can't wait to see what wacky thing she gets into next time.
You said something really interesting that I don't know that I've ever heard an author say, and it was about the way the growth and the progression doesn't just have to be forward. And in a way, you can have a whole other book with backwards progression because she's having to revisit something or because events knock her there. We've got some lovely gems and nuggets from this group, I would say, tonight. So thank you, Mia. All right, so let's go to Mark Greaney, and it's volume 11 in the Gray Man series, and you've also entered series in a different way, right? Because you wrote with one of the grades, one of the series grades. So maybe talk a little bit, I guess, about those sides of your series experience. And then I cannot believe how fast time is going. Okay, but I'm not hurrying you because I really want to hear you.
Yeah, I had written I had two books published, both mass market paperbacks. Gray Man and the follow-up to that was On Target. I'd quit my day job. I'd finished the third book in the series, and I was waiting to hear what my editor thought of it on Pins and Needles, and I still get like that, 20-something books published. But I got a call from my agent, and he asked me if I was sitting down. I was like, yeah. And he's like, how would you like to co-author a book with Tom Clancy? And I was like flummoxed. I was totally I didn't see that coming a mile away. I was actually reading his latest book at the time. And so, yeah, they had me go to Baltimore and meet Tom. And I did 3 with him before he died. And I look at my own series, the first 3 books are one type of story, and then books 4 and on are kind of a very different type of story. And it's 100% because at that point I had been working with Tom for 2 years or so. When I went back to the Gray Man, I was a different writer. I wrote bigger, I wrote more geopolitical. The Gray Man, my first book, which is the one they're making the film out of, I'm really, really proud of it, but it's basically Die Hard, an espionage version of Die Hard. Everything takes place in a very, very short period of time. You just get enough character backstory to root for the character or to hate the villains. But it doesn't go into a ton of backstory and build up a ton of character. I didn't know how to do any of that when I wrote that book. But once I'd done a couple of books and then started working with Tom, then my books just got a whole lot richer and sort of wider in scope, able to go deep and wide with the story. And it's the way that I like to write. All my books now I haven't written a book under 150,000 words in 10 years. They're usually about 160. The one book I wrote, Red Metal, I co-wrote, was 217,000 words. It's just, I tell bigger, more expansive stories, and I like to do it. I don't like the fact that it takes me months longer to write the book than it should, but the end result is what I like. I probably will keep doing that.
Well, not that it should. It sounds like that's exactly what it should take. It just, you have to, do you feel like your audience related to that change after book 3 and after that kind of transformative experience? Like, did the audience pick up on obviously, tangibly they did. The books were longer, dealt with a wide, but do you feel like they related to this being like more depth coming out of you kind of thing?
That's a great question that's hard to answer because I didn't have a big audience before I started working with Tom Clancy. I had a couple of books out. Definitely there were people that have been with me since the first Gray Man reading. And I'm sure it was a stark difference once they got to book 4 and book 5, but I think it was welcome because if you like my stuff, you know who Tom Clancy is and you like Tom Clancy. He's such an institution. So I really think that that brought my audience to me working with Tom. So that's really how I look at that.
Wow, very serendipitous. So Stuart, we touched on this in the beginning. You've got this kid in your series who is an every kid. Talk to us a little bit about Spy School, not the graphic novel installation, but also if you want to go into the book parts of it. Obviously you have at least one fan in the audience. I'm sure there are many more. So talk to us about the series.
Oh, well, I mean, the series is, that it came from, this sort of immediate fascination I had with James Bond movies as a kid. I was also a huge fan of mysteries, and so at that age was into the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and Encyclopedia Brown and the 3 investigators and just about any mystery I could get my hands on. The Westing Game by Alan Raskin, possibly the greatest mystery ever written, I think. so I liked all those, and when I think like what generates a lot of the stories for me still is just this idea that a lot of books I say like, oh, I got to go out and do research and learn about. I have a series that takes place in a zoo and deals with animal mysteries, and I do a ton of research on that or some of my other ones, but I can get very inspired to do a spy school by watching any spy movie and just imagining how off the rails it would go if I was in that movie and not Ethan Hunt or James Bond or any of the fine actors or any of your leads, really. So it's just even the basics of like like a grappling hook is like very standard spy movie or Batman technology, and yet I've never seen a grappling hook in real life. The moment somebody handed me one and said, oh, just use this, it would probably go wrong. I don't think there's no grappling hook section of Target really or anything like that.
You underestimate yourself.
It just hasn't come up. I mean,
Right. Okay. It would not, I really feel like I stepped through a time portal and I cannot be 7:55 or whatever. I'm not even look at the clock again. We must touch on Hollywood and the screen. I don't know what, if anything, your answer will be, but I'm fascinated to hear because to me, your series is super seriable on the screen. But I'd love to hear, Greg, you have experience on that side of the fence, and I would just love to hear your discussion of, the page to the screen to the page, that kind of, and current exploits in Hollywood.
Well, the first thing I'll say is that a novel is 400 pages of final product, and a feature script is about 110 pages with lots of white on the page. It's a recipe for something. It's not the final thing. And in a lot of ways, it's an invitation to collaborate. And so in a book, we're the director, we're all the talent, we're hair and makeup, we're location scout, we're cinematographers, we have to do all of it. And if you choose the team right, and if a movie or a TV show is going the right way, basically everybody comes in and raises the game. There's unbelievable amounts of talent in different departments. And it's incredible when you go from, meetings with hair and makeup to meetings with people who deal with costume, like all these, like their whole job is to think about just one aspect of it and to make it better. And it's incredible. I will recall my first movie that was made was called The Book of Henry, and Naomi Watts was a star of it. And there was one scene, it took me 19 years to get the movie made because it just did. And there's this scene, she's in a scene with Sarah Silverman, and it's really emotional. I'd written it and rewritten it over the years. I kept kind of updating the script forever. And she gives the scene. I was in Video Village when they were shooting it. And then she just pauses, and this constellation of emotions just moved across her face. You could see everything that she was feeling was expressed with a sort of series of emotions that were in her. And I realized in that moment that scene, my speech that I'd written on for over a decade wasn't going to make, it would be on the cutting room floor. Because she just did everything that the speech was trying to do, and film's a visual medium, without the need for it. And my second thought was, that's fantastic, because she could never get there if it's not for the script, if it's not for the material. But what you want to do is hand the baton off to other people who are running with it. And if they're the right creative partners, you want them to maximize, their ability to increase that. It's like Stuart's talking about the cover artist, right? Who he's working with, right? There's nothing better than when you're collaborating with somebody who makes you look better and more talented than you are, right? That's always the aim of what we want. And the flip side is, of course, if it's the wrong team and the wrong production, I always say that Hollywood productions are like relationships. They're either getting better or getting worse, like nothing's static. And, when things are going bad and you're fighting with everybody and the stars and, it's like, then you're like the drunk guy behind the bar at 3 a.m. with a broken bottle, like fighting off to protect your script, which probably means you've done everything wrong and you're equally at fault. And the script right. It's all a mess, but it can descend the other way really quickly. And so there's a lot of tricks not tricks is the wrong word. There's a lot of strategies, most importantly, who you're picking for your partners going forward, but also, writers don't direct. Like one of the clear signs of a novice is, or an amateur screenwriter, is they're putting in lots of stage directions and point of view and camera angles. And like, that's all well and good until, Francis Ford Coppola comes along and pats you on the head and says, thanks, Spanky, but I actually do this for a living. But there's lots of ways that when you're writing a script, that the use and indentation and ways that you're jumping and ways that you're capitalizing are doing a lot of the direction or conveying it without actually stating it. And so there's a lot of facility with prose that it's helpful to have from the novel side, right? Where we do direct the action. We do say when there's a close up. We do decide when we cut a scene and pick it up. And is it a, cold open for the next scene? Or are we going in mid gallop? Or are we starting and resetting anew? And so there's a lot of thought and delicacy of technique that go into crafting this, collection of words that you hope to turn into something that, sometimes can cost several $100 million.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you touched on this, I guess, when you were talking before about being in the TV, in the script room and not knowing, the lost phenomenon, like where they're writing at the end of the season versus the novel that knows everything that is going to come, and then how you let go of that. And you do let Francis, who may know a thing or two, take over and stay in your own lane so fascinating. Okay, we can all take a film class with GREGG HURWITZ. Maybe he will give one at Thriller Fest this summer or next. Each of the writers, Mia, let's go to you. You have a super screenable, I'm not Francis Ford Coppola, but I would say you have a super screenable series. Anything you'd like to share?
I can't say too much because I don't think it's ever been officially announced. But yeah, my books have been optioned for TV. We recently signed on screenwriter, and we're hoping to start pitching soon.
Very exciting. Thank you. Stuart, anything you'd like to? You have a lot of experience in this world yourself, so. I think you're muted, Stuart. Stuart, you're muted.
Sorry, it's a constant battle to try and get something made. I'm in the midst of it all the time, but it's having come from screenwriting, there are many great things about writing books, but the most amazing one is that they come out when they tell you they're going to come out. And there was my publisher still to this day loves the very first book I was going to have published. They said, okay, we're going to publish the book. And I was like, okay, well, when everything goes wrong and it doesn't happen, I'll understand. And they're like, no, the book is going to come out. I'm like, I hear this all the time. And they're like, no. And the books come out. They come out, and it's a joy to write something is actually going to come out, as opposed to writing something that has, a 1 in 10 chance of getting made, and who knows what after that. So
I keep saying I think I will have made it as a writer when something of mine gets delayed in Hollywood. Okay, Mark, Chris Evans, and Ryan Gosling. Come on, dish real quick. You guys are all coming back tomorrow night for another installation of the show, right?
Yeah, sure. I'll get on the horn, see if I can get them all together.
Okay, Ryan. No. Oh, I meant you. No, we don't need them. No, you guys. Stuart,
I thought you were telling me to
we went through
book
the
your
time
guests.
so fast. I cannot believe it. But Mark, tell us about Ryan and Chris Evans.
Yeah, so it's a really nice cast, and I'm excited. I read the screenplay. The screenplay was written by Joe Russo and directed by the Russo brothers, who did a lot of the big Marvel films. And Joe wrote the screenplay back in 2015, I think. They had me come out to Los Angeles and work with them for a couple of days as he was starting to write it. And the whole thing kind of died on the vine as is the way that it usually goes. And it went that way with me. But it was kind of rekindled last year, or almost 2 years ago now, when they made the announcement. And I heard that Gosling was interested in playing the lead, but over the past 12 years since the book had been optioned, or 13 years, there's not a single A-list movie star who hasn't said that they were interested, or at least it comes back to me. So I didn't really believe anything until they were filming scenes in Europe, and then you're like, okay, this actually might happen. But yeah, I was much more prepared for this to fall through, as it had done many times before.
But you're actually going to get your popcorn and your M&Ms and all that. Well, it's on Netflix, so I would still have popcorn and M&Ms.
Yeah,
right?
me too.
Congratulations. Listen, I really am so grateful to Gregg Hurwitz and Mia and Stuart and Mark, everybody for joining us tonight. It's just been such a fun night. Grateful to the Rogue Women Writers for hosting this event. Chris Goss for technical wizardry. I need to let you all know, first of all, if you attended tonight, you'll be entered to win a copy of Dark Horse, and the Rogues will let you know. Sign up to subscribe to our new newsletter on the Rogue Women Writers website, because you'll get an announcement of future Rogue Reads event. Join us March 14th for our show featuring John Lesquois, Kelly Garrett, Reese Bowen, and Valerie Wilson-Wesley. That's on March 14th. And Greg, Mia, Stuart, and Mark, thank you for one of the most fun nights I've had in a very long time. You guys all deserve a huge. Everybody buy the books on display on our website. You can see the covers. You will have a weekend of fantastic, thrilling, humorous, and heartwarming writing. And thank you to our guests and the Rogues.
Thank you all.